This is 7 Minutes Cyber with Danny Lawler of Request and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. And the 7 minutes start now. So on this episode, we just wanted to talk about the practicalities and the real numbers that we're talking about when someone says a firm that suffers a cybersecurity attack, that can impact the bottom line in the firm. And there was a recent article published where they tied things like the Yahoo cyber attack, they tied that to a reduction in the valuation that Verizon paid for the firm. And another example where a firm was in the process of being acquired, they suffered a cyber attack, and as a result of that, the acquirer put a hold on the purchase, which not only had a financial impact because the value of the deal dropped, but also put both firms in a kind of a holding pattern because the acquirer couldn't get on with the acquisition and the acquiree couldn't move on with any other strategy. So both firms were just waiting until this cyber attack was dealt with. So Danny, I suppose we just wanted to talk about what would this mean for a firm who are getting involved in M&A and what kind of lessons they should take from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the key thing, or one of the takeaways from those two cases, was the numbers you're talking about in terms of the reduction in valuation are significant. So ranging from 7% to 25%. So 25% reduction in value because of a cybersecurity incident. And if you're talking about firms that are worth hundreds of millions, the dollars add up pretty quickly. So if you were to acquire a firm and not know that they had a cybersecurity issue, you immediately have overpaid by potentially 25% or even more. So it's very important that you do your best to try and identify that before you put ink on the page. Now, typically when an acquirer is going through the pre-purchase process, they will have a due diligence team that will go and they'll look at, you'll have your legal expertise to look at the contracts and look at the contractual situation. You'll probably have a financial expert looking at the numbers. You may have a pensions expert looking at pension provisioning, because those are the kinds of financial gaps that can open up pretty quickly. But I guess what I would take from this is the need to have in that team somebody with a cybersecurity expertise to try and anticipate or get ahead of whether or not this is a real risk in this firm and whether it's significant enough to start to affect the valuation of price you would pay for this. So I just wonder, Sam, from your perspective, if you were that cyber person in the due diligence team, how would you go about assessing a firm that you're looking to acquire from a cyber perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like how a firm should go through due diligence before they outsource to an outsourced service provider. And before you send your data across to them, or before you engage them in your processes, you confirm that they're not going to present a security risk to you. So you start with, maybe a very high level kind of questionnaire to get a sense of who's in the firm who can answer about cybersecurity. Ask them about what their approach is, what their frameworks are, what their governance model is, whatever it might be, because if they do these things, they'll have evidence to show that they do them. And then you dig further down. So if you are engaging with the firm that's being acquired, and if they're being open and honest about things, then you can talk to them about, well, what kind of attacks have they experienced? What near misses have they had? What their defenses are, and things like that. And again, depending on the acquirer and how they baseline cybersecurity, there are frameworks and standards that you can baseline against, whether it's an ISO 27001 risk, or Cyber Essentials, or the CIS Top 20, or whatever it might be. But to be able to take some kind of an industry accepted benchmark and say, well, for the firm that we're acquiring, how close are they to what we expect is an acceptable level of risk, or of management of risk? And if they're way off that, then recognize that in your purchase price to say, well, if you're way off that, not only is it going to take us a lot of money to get up to where we want you to be, but also if you're way off that, the likelihood or risk that you have suffered a cyber attack is greater. So therefore, price that into the price that you're prepared to pay.
Let's get that into the valuation. I guess in addition to dealing with the firm directly, there are other sources of information that you might turn to try and fish around and see what you can learn about that firm, and that might even involve, looking at what does the dark web have on that firm.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I suppose, if you're asking the people who work in the acquirer or the acquiree firm in the firm you're trying to buy, obviously there's a bias there because they want to present the best picture. So you do want to see evidence behind their subjective answers. But as well as that, you could decide to independently assess them. So with their knowledge, running penetration tests against their external perimeter to A, see if there's any gaps and if you can get in, or B, at a minimum, that even if you do get in, that there's some kind of detection within the firm where they become aware that someone has got in and they take steps to break that down. There's also third-party services which will assess the perceived security of a firm by looking at what's publicly available, what's on the dark web, what kind of data about the firm is out there. And there's a number of those that you can pay. They hardly don't even know the firm that they're assessing. They're just out there, like a black box, looking at ways in, looking at what kind of indicators are there to suggest that things aren't right. So there's ways to do it with the involvement of the firm you're trying to acquire, and there's ways to do it without their involvement. But
Yeah,
either way, you need to think about it.
absolutely. And I like if I think about how these kind of processes, these due diligence typically work at the moment, these pre-acquisition checks, you tend to have obviously the focus on things like legal, or if you were acquiring a regulated financial services firm, you're going to be focusing very much on their compliance record and their authorizations. No more than if you were buying an landfill site, you'd be looking at your environmental considerations. But when it comes to cyber, and when you think about the impact that a cyber incident could have, both in terms of reputation and in terms of fixing, but in terms of if you have to pay out in a ransomware, you're talking about up to 25% or more even, then at the moment, cyber tends to be not at the top of the list of your due diligence process. It's certainly middle or lower. And when you do your due diligence, it tends to rely on the information provided to you by the firm that you're trying to acquire. And assuming even that they are giving you the information that they have, that's not always, they may not always know the full story because they may have been subject to attack and not know it.
Well, that's it. I mean, if their defenses aren't up to scratch, and even if they are, sometimes these attackers can be very smart and intelligent, so they can be lurking there. So it's recognizing that cybersecurity is a potential risk, a potential liability. And when you're purchasing a firm, you're going to be taking on those liabilities. So doing what you can, no different than assessing the accounts or assessing the pension liabilities or assessing whatever other potential risks there are, doing what you can with the right resources to really assess what this risk is so you can put a proper valuation on the firm.
Absolutely. And that's our 7 minutes. And in addition to your evaluation, then you're building in risk mitigation, like your liability and your warranty provisions and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. 7 minutes up, man.
Thanks a lot, Danny.
Thanks.